Hello class, George here, and in this video we're going to pick right up from the last one, meaning we're finally done with the XML side. We've taken a little bit of time to talk about the R file and how the magic of associations between the XML and of course very soon the code side, well, it is really not magic at all. It's just a series of integer values that we store. But we're not quite done yet. There's a few things I want to talk about before we jump in. So before we dive right into code, we have our, let's go under Android and go to project. Actually, no, let's say to Android. Android's good. Open up our app. And under there, we of course have our resources. And we have two areas we've been discussing. We have the value section, which has our strings file, where we stored those strings and made references to them. And we saw that in the R file, that's where an integer is created automatically and stored. Now, in our layout file, we also have our layout stored right here. The layout itself is going to have a value. There's a problem though. The layout has a value, but all of these individual widgets aren't going to have values, not by default. And it's up to us to add these integer values to these. The reason we need to do that is because we have our XML file over here someplace, stored as a resource. And a resource is anything that isn't code pretty much. It can be an image, it can be a layout, it can be a string and so forth. And we have that R file, which is going to be taking, well, the R file is generated by taking all these different resources and assigning to them those integer values, automatically generated for us. Our code side, the Java side over here, is going to need to use these integer values to create things like the layout that you see on the screen, or to be able to access each of those individual widgets that we have. If it does not have a resource integer, we're not going to be able to grab it. That's just the way things work. So we need to make sure that anything in our layout, such as those buttons and the text that we plan on manipulating in code, have integer values. If they don't, we're not going to be able to grab them. What the code side is going to do, the Java side is, it's actually going to take this XML file and it's going to inflate it. And then once our layout has been inflated, which means basically you've taken it from this description of what it should look like and created instances of all of the different widgets and objects, views and view groups and so forth, and actually created them in memory. Now remember, if you don't have a reference to these individual objects, and that reference is going to be those integer values, you can't grab hold of them. So you need those references. And right now, the only reference that we have stored is the layout's integer value, which was automatically generated. If we go over here and we come into project and we hunt for our R file and we look for layout, which would be somewhere up here close to the top. We might have to do a search for it. Do a search, Control F, layout. There we go. Here's layout, and we'll find activity, my first app there. Let's force these things to be added to our R file. I'm going to close it right there. So the first thing is the button. We're definitely going to need the button. The magic 8-ball text right here, we really don't need any access to, so we can let it be. But this button here, we do need access to. And the reason we need access is because we're going to need to use some callbacks, that is some listeners, to make it so when the user presses these buttons, we can react to that event. But we implement an interface for how to handle these events. Scrolling on down, here is the text we had done before. What we really need is our ID, and that's right here. So let's go over to the text side of things. Android went ahead and added IDs. However, these IDs are horrible IDs. So normally you would come in here and have to write Android:ID is equal to. We have this @ symbol, and what's really important to note is we have a plus symbol. This is different than the strings, right? With the strings here, we have an @ symbol. In this particular case, we have this plus, and this plus means I don't exist. Please add me to the R file. Without that plus, it's going to just be looking for this, but it will never actually be generated. @ plus, and we're going to add a new ID, and it's going to be called text view. That's a horrible name for this, though. We should be calling it something different, such as magic 8-ball text. Same thing down here with button. Let's call this get answer button. And then finally at the bottom, let's call this fortune text, something like that. Hit save. If you click on these now and look for the IDs, you'll see that those are the new IDs. Android Studio will hide from you the true R file. So if I double click on this R file, there's a good chance I'm not going to find those IDs, those resource IDs. What we should be doing is just do a quick clean project and then rebuild the project. Let Android do its thing, and once it's all built, check our R file. And if it's still not up just hit the run button, just cancel out of it. That way, Android will properly replace the R file in all associations, and you should finally see what you're looking for. Okay, so it finished in about 10 seconds, it says. One error. So our IDs were called, what was one of them? Get answer button and fortune text. So let's look up fortune text. Oh, there it is. And get answer button right there. So there you can see the IDs we've requested have been added to the R file by Android Studio automatically with good names that we're going to remember when we go over to the code side of things. Okay, so now it's time for us to jump into the code side of things. So this is where we're going to need to use those R values, those names we've created for those integers, and start using them to grab resources. Android is going to inflate this for us, create instances of all the different widgets, which are, of course, views and view groups. And then once it's completely built, then we can start requesting access to these different widget elements. And that's when we can start making changes to the layout. If you just inflate the layout and you fail to get references to any of these objects, there's not really much you can do to make your game or your app interactive. You do need to get references to these things. So let's just kind of go through this line by line. At override, we're overriding a method provided by our parent class. That's app_compat activity. You might be saying, George, you've been talking about activities. Yes, there is a class called activity, as you can see right there. We're not using it, meaning this one's going to be backwards compatible with older versions of Android. We should want to use this because it's going to make our app more compatible with more devices, meaning we have a larger market we can be offering our app to and hopefully making more money. You don't get a constructor. You don't get, well, we're not in C++ world, so deconstructor. But the idea here is this is as close as you get to the constructor. Android has a very interesting life cycle. We're not going to get into it in this video, but I am going to pull it up. So if you want to take a look at it and really just type in Android lifecycle and find an image somewhere. And this is going to show you all the different steps that happen in Android when your activity is launched. The first thing you the programmer, get to do is to use the onCreate method to set everything up, to inflate your layout, grab references, and do anything else that's necessary. So there's multiple steps down this hierarchy between an activity shutting down at this end and an activity being killed. And because you can never quite know when things might go wrong, when an app may be killed, when an app might be, you have all of these different methods that you get to implement to allow you to catch the state of your program, to save it out so that when the user comes back, they're back where they were, even though Android itself might have decided to destroy your activity or killed the process. Just understand there's a hierarchy, a chain of events that happen. In onCreate, it's the very beginning. This bundle we're going to talk about later on, and you can also use the bundle to store values and information, but we then have this thing called super.onCreate. We're calling the super method onCreate. That is app_compat activities method for onCreate. And we do that because it's going to set up some stuff for us that's necessary. So we always want to make sure we're calling our parents' onCreate method. So next line is the one that's important. And that's the one that's going to do all the inflation for us. And that's called setContentView. But it's grabbing that R file, it's looking under the layout section for the layout class, and then it's grabbing the activity myFirstApp. And that is the integer value to correspond to our layout, the one that we designed over here. If you don't believe me, go check back out that R file, look up the layouts, and find it in here. Here's our layout. That's exactly what it's done. There's the class layout. Here we are with the activity, that myFirstApp. This thing is responsible for inflating everything for us. So I just hit Control and Spacebar to bring up my IntelliSense, whatever it's called in this program. But the idea here is we can see the method right here. And in this, it's setContentView. It takes in that integer value, and it returns to us absolutely nothing to work with. So now that we've inflated our view, and that inflation process will have gone through our layout here, and created instances of the linear layout, the text view, the button, and the other text view. Since they exist now, we can use the names, the IDs of those objects to find them and gain a reference. And we're going to do that through another method inside of the activity class. We're going to do this by using findViewById. It's going to ask us for that ID, and we can do r.id. And then we can find the ID file. So the first thing we're going to want to grab is the answer button. The fact that I called it get at the beginning is kind of dumb now that I think about it, but we'll just go with it. Here you'll notice the return type over here is of type view. We don't want to be messing with a view. We want to be messing with a button. So we're going to have to typecast this thing over. So let's do button, actually, let's come up here because we're going to want to use this in other methods. If we declare it inside of the onCreate, it's going to have local scope and it's going to disappear. So we want to do a private button answer button. There we are. We don't have button in our import list. So it's saying, hey, do you want to include it? Go ahead and hit Alt-Enter. And there we are. Android Studio automatically imports that for us. And that's going to be something that happens a lot when you're programming in Android Studio. We can set this equal to that button. Answer button is equal to this. Now there's going to be a problem. And the problem is the fact that this returns a view type and this is a button type. This is a superclass to this one, so we're going to need to typecast this thing over. Since we know we're dealing with a button because that's what we've created, it's perfectly okay for us to be doing this typecasting. So let's do button. This is the same way you would typecast things in C++ and in C# if you're familiar with those languages, or if you're in C#, you might do something like this as button instead. Exact same thing. We get a view. We're casting it over to a button. Since a button is a child of that particular type of class, we can do this with no problem. We need to grab the text, right? And what do we call the text? We call the text blah, 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 fortune text. So let's make a new field here, private text, and that's the wrong kind of text. We want a text view. That's what we want. And this is now superfluous, so we can get rid of that. Private text view, fortune text. There we are. Now we can set this equal. So fortune text is going to be equal to, once again, we're going to need to typecast this over to a text view object, and we'll do a find view by ID, and we'll do r.id and fortune text right there, semicolon, and we're done. And that's all we're going to discuss in this video. So once again, setting IDs. Android Studio did it automatically, but gave it some, well, not wonderful names. Once we had those IDs, we're in the code side of things. We can inflate our view right here, our layout, excuse me. Once it's inflated, instances of all these different objects actually exist. But if we want to get a reference to those objects, we need to make sure we use their R value and the function find view by ID. And very important, something students always screw up, typecasting that object over to the type you expect. We're dealing with a button, typecast it to a button. Thanks everyone, hope you had a good time. See you later, bye.